All right, so things have moved right along. We are getting closer to the end. We're going to have this lecture that's just going to cover some topics that we haven't spoken about before. Maybe I've touched on them a little bit, but I just wanted to go through and kind of give you a heads up on some items that you might come across as part of your personal finance life. And then we'll have another lecture type thing that's going to be not only a lecture, but it's also going to be a course review and and a preparation for the final. And then you'll be working on your term project and getting the last bits of your homework done. Um, but there's not as much homework on the second half of the course because the intent is to have you really put some time into the your term paper. The thing with the term paper is, it shouldn't be just some sort of assignment that, well, worst case, you either make a real short one or you, use AI and just turn in some sort of slop that's generic and fairly transparent and not useful to you for either a grade or in real life. This that uh, plan there, your term paper can hopefully provide a sort of a template, a plan for how you to go forward, how you at this point kind of think about all those different elements of your how you're going to structure your financial life. Um, Ideally, if you're a traditional student and you've got some years before you actually end up in a you know career type setting, you'll maybe put some more thought into what you're going to do because what will typically happen, and this varies depending on the student. Some students are already obviously immersed in their career, and the rest of that, they're already um, further along in their life, financial life, etc. But if you're just somebody who's a traditional student and you're working a part-time job or doing something that you have no interest in terms of a career, it doesn't make sense for you due to the sums of money involved and how different your life is now from where it's going to be probably 5 years out when you're in the middle of your career. It doesn't make sense to come up with a comprehensive plan um, when that's not going to be the main part of your life where you're going to be able to accrue wealth. And so that's why, if you look on the plan, that this is all laid out in the syllabus, um, where you go ahead and put forth your plan and you make this scenario. It's more of a forecast of what your life is going to be like at that point, and you just make some assumptions that may or may not be right. But as you know, I've talked about it a few times. I used to be uh, in the military flying, and the military's huge on planning stuff out, especially flying. You have to because no matter things just go way too fast, and if you don't have a plan, things just go to whatever they call it, a helmet fire, where you just overload. You don't know what to do. Um, that being said, if you've got a real strong plan and everything changes, and that's accepted. But when everything changes, but you have elements from your previous plan and you're just sort of modifying things, you've already thought about it and you're just selecting elements. You know, it's not the first time you've been through this. It just turns out much better. Because what happens a lot of times in back to say perhaps a corporate setting, you walk in there, you're HR introduction thing, and there's probably, I don't know, onboarding type things. There's most of the situations I've been in like that, there's a group. It's done as a group, and the HR person's in there, and they're talking about insurance, they're talking about retirement options, they're talking about all this different stuff, healthcare even. And it's a bit overwhelming if you don't know anything about it. And if you're making this decisions that are going to stick with you for the rest of your life, or at least the rest of the career with that company. Because a lot of times these things are not changeable. They aren't expecting you to make the decision that day, but they give you like a week or something. And you brand new with your job, you maybe relocating, you just got a lot of stuff going on, and you don't want to come off, as the new stupid guy who's asking questions that are maybe semi-obvious, at least to the person instructing the class, and maybe to your other students. You don't want to highlight yourself and make bad choices. And anyway, so if you've thought about all these things before, perhaps you've got a spouse who's got health care. If you take health care at your other company, you're setting yourself up for failure. Number one, you're going to cost yourself more money by having double insurance. You don't get double the coverage. What you do get is a squabble between two competing insurance companies because neither one wants to pay. So make sure there's a provision if things go south in the relationship where you can get, you know, your health insurance back. But yeah, ideally, one good health insurance is better than, well, it's better than two good health insurance because believe me, anytime you fill out paperwork regarding insurance, they'll say, do you have other insurance? If you check that yes box, prepare for an onslaught of mail and emails and everything else as each one tries to weasel out of not having to pay for it, tries to put it on the other guy. But anyway, that's just one thing. There's also financial plans. They'll say, well, what are you interested in? And sometimes the default decisions are not good ones. You may want to, you know, do certain things. So anyway, there's a lot to it. And so, there's two aspects of the term paper. One is getting a grade. Two is coming up with a plan that you might use well beyond this course. And whatever. Maybe I'm being too over the top that this paper's too important, but uh, it's up to you. You can make it important if you want it to be. You can make it useful, or you can make it just a silly assignment and move on. But I don't think that's a good strategy. All righty. So other investments that we really don't touch on, and a lot of times you won't see the book sort of touch on these sort of things because I'm not giving investment advice here. I'm just telling you, facts, data. Precious metal, gold, silver. This was a no-brainer up until this year. Gold. Well, it's kind of tempered now, but it did have a pretty good run, and a lot of people felt vindicated. But it doesn't make up for years of just kind of going sideways. Gold and silver, it's almost generational too, where older generations tend to go for precious metals, and maybe in Alaska there's also a feeling of just because of the state's connection with mining and stuff, where they may be more attractive, but they still need to compete in terms of making money. There is there's a lot of the fact that it's a physical metal can't be taken away, all the rest of that. But the whole doomsday scenario, I do not buy that the apocalypse is going to happen and you're going to be out there trading gold for fuel and things. I don't know. The person who's going to have all the power in that case is the person with all the weapons. So if you're going down that road, yeah, probably guns and gold, because if you don't have both, you're not going to have both. Collectibles, hard to deal with a little bit in terms you got to store them, you got to appraise them, you got to make sure you got genuine items. I'm going to go through these one by one here in a second, so I'll just stick to the headings here. Speculative stocks, um, get rich quick schemes. Yeah, it can be a lot of fun, but yeah, historically, if I would not have ever got involved in a penny stock, and I didn't get involved in that much, but it's like going to Las Vegas. You're you know you get cleaned out. Now, when I go to Las Vegas and cleaned out, I'm not a big spender because it's not that I'm cheap. I mean, I will gamble on stuff like different stocks, but Las Vegas, it's quite obvious if I say obvious again, anyway, it's quite apparent that, yeah, who built those casinos, that this is not an even proposition. Somebody apparently is winning here, and it ain't you. Cryptocurrencies, big fan, kind of the new big thing. They had their ups and downs, though. I would not want my life savings, or unfortunately, as much of my life savings involved in crypto as I do, but man, the use cases and stuff, the ability to execute financial transactions, the ability to just do stuff. I mean, even the Iranians are on board with this, and it's not all gangster uses, organized crime. The problem with crypto is it is completely traceable. So these crypto addresses that are receiving basically the bounties or whatever the tolls, the fees to go through Strait of Hormuz that had occurred recently. Yeah, you can find out whose address is and all the rest of that. If it was cash, it's completely untraceable. Same with gold. So but anyway, there are a lot of things that can be done that are exceedingly fast and exceedingly cheap in terms of fees. And cryptos, it's kind of crossed the whole Rubicon. It's beyond the inflection point. It's gotten mass adoption within Wall Street. Wall Street was a bit of the enemy, because it was cryptos looked as a threat. Now Wall Street is making bucks, making lots of money from crypto. Big ETFs, exchange traded funds. The crypto's going nowhere because those people are involved and they like it. Real estate, great investment. Um, pretty darn stable though. You're not going to see the volatility. You can find volatility, but depends on the market. But it's just overall something I like. But you don't have to pick just one. For example, I don't, well, I've got crypto and real estate, and well, I still have some speculative stocks. But let's say you make money. Speculation is kind of the extreme. I definitely go with some higher risk stocks than the blue chip stuff. But if you make some money here and then transfer it to real estate, that's kind of a nice blend. And then the reason why you got to do something, and maybe not in this thing, maybe the regular stock market should be up here, um, is because of inflation. If you do nothing, you've done something, and that something is not good. That money you have, the buying power of it is being eroded by the day. You're basically, putting vegetables in a vault. Yeah, yeah, you'll still have your vegetables, but you open up that nasty, drawer in your refrigerator, and you're going to find a bag full of they don't keep well. Neither does cash. It just you still have that quantity. You still got that pound of lettuce, but it's metamorphosized into a pound of goo, and dollars are almost that bad. This is my problem with gold. So do do what you want, but yeah, when gold is kind of creeping along here and stocks are going up 10% and it's whatever. It's good to have it in a blend, maybe some diversification. But if you were somebody fully invested in gold and your friend was fully invested in the market, um, he's going to be doing quite well, and you're going to be talking about how great gold is. Um, Here's another chart. Now, again, Bitcoin's kind of an outlier because it started at nothing. I bought my first two Bitcoin at 700 bucks. And again, you know, you don't, you still make stupid decisions even doing that. When it got to 2,600 bucks, I thought, wow, I'm killing it. That's is that four times? Anyway, close to it. And I sold one of them. It got up to 125 there for a while, and now it's back down at 70. But it's even with this whole Orion situation, it's still starting to go back up. It's at, I don't know, 72 or something this morning. And because Morgan Stanley, another big Wall Street firm, new ETF coming out, huge new inflows of cash. These are some of the what would be the Magnificent Seven company: Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, which would be Alphabet, bonds. That's why I don't like bonds. Not a big fan. Gold, slightly better. Dollar and Standard and Poor's, the S&P. So regular market. You know, that's why I tend to be in these other stocks. S&P is not bad. It's doing quite a bit better than these others, but it's not up here with the big boys. But these big boys may change. Software is getting beat up. Software, that's one of the big things that AI does quite well. The hardware, on the other hand, that's a good idea. But software right now, those stocks are getting clobbered. This is why inflation happens. The money supply. As the money supply increases, like say you get something like COVID, well, the easy answer is, well, let's just print money, and that's what they do. And the you know the problem is you have more money chasing the same amount of goods. The amount of goods in circulation out there is fairly finite. If you push a bunch of money out there, Now you have, more money chasing the same amount of goods. So things go up because there's more money to be had. Okay, collectibles. So kind of in detail. Um, Again, if you're somebody who, I've got a friend who's got a bunch of, old, whatever they were, Model 94 old rifles and things like that that are worth a fortune. Um, but he's got that skill. Counterfeits, I've been to the Middle East a bunch, and you go someplace and you out of boredom, and there's always people wanting to sell you stuff. Um, yeah, I bought emeralds, and in fact, I even bought a diamond engagement ring that is not a diamond. I mean, it wasn't priced like a diamond either, though. I mean, that should have been the first clue. So there's too much of that going on, but there are some investment strategies where people have fine art. I've always done well in cars, but when I mean doing well, making 5, 10 grand, and I couldn't live off that, but it is kind of fun at least. And I've had, some classic cars now and then. But the problem is also you got to find somebody to buy it and sell it. And for example, I've got a good friend. He's unfortunately he's passed away, but he was a old Turkish guy, and he had a carpet place. And Mehmet, I'd known him for many, many years, and so I was going back to New Jersey for no good reason. I was trying to make the best of it, and I was living in Turkey at the time, and so I talked to him, and because we were talking about how much these carpets were worth in the States, so I took three of his little carpets. They were like little Tabrises. They probably sell for 12, 1,500 bucks in the States, and they were about 300 in Turkey. So I took three of those with me, and I just put them in the bag, and I went to a place in New Jersey, a carpet place, while I was there, and I offered it, to the guy. Well, first I looked at the stuff, and sure enough, I confirmed that those same little carpets were, they're nice handmade Persian carpets. They were worth about 12, 1,500 bucks all day in his shop. And I said, well, I actually have a couple, three of these. Would you be interested in buying them? And he said, sure, and what would you give me? Two, 300, 300, 400 bucks. Anyway, back to what I paid for, because that's the wholesale price for them. The reason why that guy's charging 15, 1,800 bucks is because he's got this carpet boutique with stacked with carpets. He's got overhead. He's got selection. He if you come in there to look at something, he's throwing all kinds of stuff out. And, it's maybe not quite the same hospitality in Turkey. You're not there sitting there drinking chai or having a beer while you talk about carpets and everything else. But anyway, he gets that price. If you, I got those carpets back in New Jersey, and I guess Craigslist was the thing back then. I don't think they had Marketplace. But anyway, if I went to sell those things used, I'm not going to get more than, I don't know, maybe five, six, or it's not going to be the same amount of money as this guy would get in his shop, because he's got his reputation. He's got the ability to take credit cards. It's like selling stuff on eBay or something. People are on there, they're looking for a deal. They're not looking to pay full retail price. So that's another problem. And then storage security. Things are at risk. They can get stolen. They can get damaged. You got to take care of them. Um, you know, Say what you will about Bitcoin or stocks or whatever. I'm not having to store it. Gold, yeah. If I've got physical gold, I've got to store that as well. Okay, speculative stocks. This is everything that used to happen in a bad way in terms of scams and pump and dump and all that. That's just been multiplied now that the internet is out there. And the main issue is the reason why they go down there is in the small penny stocks, non-securities exchange commission regulated stocks. There's pretty strong penalties. If Elon Musk says something stupid that manipulates the stock, he can get sued. He can go to jail. I mean, that will happen if somebody in a official position with a corporation that's registered with the SEC makes a statement that materially affects the stock price and it's false information, they're in big trouble. Penny stocks, that doesn't exist. They can pump and do all this kind of stuff, and it may be fraudulent, whatever, but it's not going to get prosecuted. It's not the same sort of thing. So any sort of endeavor that they're just nonsensical. When you see somebody on a podcast saying, "Oh, you need to get involved in this stock because it's going to make you a ton of money and all this," if you really had that kind of information, that insider or hidden gem, would you share it? No, you would do it. It's like the old saying, teachers teach and the others whatever the doers do. Or I, the name escapes me. The idiom. I don't know. Anyway, um, yeah. So no, they're trying to pump and dump for the most part, or they they would be out there clobbering it themselves and not let you in on the secret. Futures and options, interesting stuff. Options are fun to explore. Options involve the right but not the responsibility to do delivery. Futures require delivery. We didn't really talk about that this much because they're not really something you come across that often in basic personal finance, other than somebody saying, "Hey, did you hear about this? This is a great way to make money." Um, it can happen, but futures are, I would just put them in basically a dangerous category. What happens in futures? They do have a great role, a useful role in commerce and industry and all that, and they do present a financial opportunity out there to you, but they're not for the novice kind of person. What happens in say futures? They're used in a lot of different parts of industry, but let's look at an example right now. Let's say Delta Airlines is trying to sell tickets for flights in October of 2026. So whatever, more than 6 months out. They have no clue how much fuel is going to be. There's this whole situation in Iran, everything else, but people buy tickets. They don't want, Delta wants to be able to sell their tickets now, and they've got enough stuff to worry about with, aircraft and weather and everything else. Fuel cost is, if they can eliminate some of these variables, they will pay to do that. So let's say jet fuel is trading for $5 a gallon right now, just as a round number. If Delta wants to eliminate this variable, they will offer a futures contract. They'll, have some intermediary, some commercial bank do this for them. But anyway, the gist of the thing would be, Delta Airlines puts out an offer for October 2026 delivery of 1 million gallons of jet fuel at the price of 5.50 a gallon. And so they've developed this financial instrument. And so somebody on the other side, investor can go, yeah, I think the price of oil is going to be, still at $5 or maybe go down slightly, and I'll take that bet basically. Again. Anyway, so if they take that offer, then they're on the hook to deliver that fuel, regardless of the price. So if something happens and fuel is now $10 a gallon, tough luck. They still got to deliver. So that's where you can get really hammered. If fuel though stays the same or goes down to $4, well, they're making, if it's going from five and they're you know getting paid 5.50, that's cool. They're making 50 cents times a million. Or if it goes lower, they're making even more. So that's how that works. Now on an option just is the option to do that. So this might work like, let's say your neighbor's got a house and you're really interested in buying this house, but you got a lot of things going on right now. You don't have the cash, but 6 months from now, um, you want to buy this home, and you want the option to buy this home. So they're going to put the house on the market for 500,000, and you you can get a lawyer. You can just do this small scale. You can say, I will pay you, you know, say whatever 525,000 in 6 months for that home. I want the option to do this. Now it's an option, so I want the option to be able to buy it in 6 months for 525, but I don't have to buy it if I decide not to. If the price of real estate goes down or I lose my job, I don't have to do it. I don't have to follow through. But I'm going to pay you, you know, this uh, fee, this premium right now. I'll give you 10,000 bucks in cash, is they would call that consideration or whatever the options term for it would be, to keep that house off the market for the next 6 months, and to reserve it for me in case I decide to execute my option to buy it for 525. If 6 months rolls around and for one reason or another I decide not to do it, I don't have to. But if 6 months rolls around and I say I'm exercising my option, sell me the house for 525, they're committed to do it. So if you do that in a stock perspective, the same sort of things are out there. Options contracts are out there. So you have the opportunity to buy, say, Apple stock at some price out in the future. And if Apple stock surges and you say, "Yep, I want to execute my option because it makes sense. I'm going to execute the option that we got involved in, months ago, and I'm going to buy it at that fixed price." If Apple stock drops for some reason, you wouldn't execute that option. You would just let your option expire worthless. You don't get your premium back. You don't get that consideration back. Nope. That was the fee that you paid to purchase that option. But anyway, that's how it works. So futures and options can be very cool, but um, people who survive doing futures and options, the people who are buying the stuff on Wall Street, they typically have hedges on the other side. They'll buy a futures contract for fuel, and then they'll sell an options contract on the other side of the bed. And so all they need is price movement. If there's price movement either way, they're going to cover themselves, because if they lose their butt in the futures thing, well, they're going to sell the option that's on the other side of that trade, and they're going to cover it. So, but for you just to go in and buy a single-sided future is probably, anyway, a little more advanced. But in case you come across it, what of you may get out there and do this at some point in the future. Bitcoin, the new gold, perhaps, different generation, store of wealth that's got a lot of good things about it. The big thing about Bitcoin is there's only 21 million of them that will ever be made. So that notion of the money supply of the Bitcoin supply increasing, it can only increase up to 21 million. And that's this whole concept of the halving. That's a little bit beyond this discussion, but it makes it anti-inflationary. Wild fluctuations, yep, but it's a little less wild than it used to be because Wall Street and people like that involved. Um, Bitcoin is kind of the big daddy. There's altcoins. There's all these other coins that are involved. I would recommend staying away from those unless but that gets into the get rich quick kind of things. And yeah, again, I've bought some altcoins and generally lost money in most of those disruptive assets. The power of that. Um, yeah, rather than generate these well-placed political opponents, for the most part, they've converted those political opponents and convinced them that they too can maybe make some money off of it, and it will change the financial world. I think that's inevitable. So you used to have these very predictable curves, and then something happened. We're up in this range. We went up this way, and then we started Peter, and so the mold is broken because it's just evolved and Wall Street's involved and other things. So that's kind of annoying. Prices that were historical now. So real estate. Real estate is these other things I talked about. You may or may not get involved, but real estate you almost certainly will, at least in terms of your own home. And the good thing about it is, yeah, it's a tangible asset. There's only, just like crypto, there's only so much that's well, crypto's not necessarily tangible, but there's only so much real estate that is there. I mean, what's in the world is what's in the world. Relatively safe, but this enables you also to use leverage. You can use borrowed money, so you can increase that risk by using borrowed money to buy it, to uh, effectively increase that interest rate you're getting. Lack of liquidity, that is inevitable. I've got a piece of property for sale. I think it's probably been for sale for a couple of years now. I've got it way overpriced, but I only need one buyer, so that's fine. And I don't need to sell it that bad. But if I did need to sell it, even then it'd be difficult. I'd have to lower the price dramatically, and that's not something I'm willing to do. Inherent hedge because of the fixed nature of properties and then potential to enjoy it, enhance your life. So those are the different assets. Now I'm going to talk a little about business formation just because I think it's important that you maybe, I would hope that some of you would kind of aspire to maybe being your own boss and having your own business, whether it's a side hustle or your permanent thing. But I do want to touch on some of the aspects of business formation because the easiest one, the sole proprietorship, is arguably the worst formation and it's the most prevalent. And I'd kind of steer you away from it. That's where you just, you know, let's say you've got a trade, you're like a plumber or something like that, or you're going to do whatever type of business. But just for example, we'll keep it in the trade. So uh, you're a plumber and you just put a sign on your van or whatever, and you just get a business license and you just start doing it. And you don't really put any time into that business formation part of it. Just owned by you. Partnership, couple people, not that you see them in some situations, maybe sometimes in investments, limited partnerships, but not that common. But corporations, and what I'm talking when I say corporations, I'm using the larger term in terms of corporations, all types of corporations, because there's C-class corporations that are generally public corporations, and you have limited liability companies, you have some other different forms, but most of these corporations, they have unique characteristics. Number of shareholders can be just one. That's all I've ever done. Corporate and shareholders taxed, yeah, double taxation sometimes. But this liability limited, you don't see that up here, especially in sole proprietorship. And the reason it's limited is because it's a legal entity. It has what they call personhood. They can sue, be sued. It doesn't die when you die, other things like that. S corporation, a form of corporation, mainly done for tax purposes, and then an LLC, which is another form of a small corporation. And this is typically um, what you would form. And you don't need a whole bunch of horsepower in terms of the legal. You go on the Alaska Commerce site, pay $250, fill out a couple forms, and you have a corporation. You did it all yourself. Not a big deal. So sole proprietorship, yeah, owned and operated single person. So the plumbing example is pretty typical. Small, three-fourths, not because they're good, just because people are lazy. It's tougher to get credit in any case because it's all on you. So this shows the numbers. But if you were looking at revenue or something like that, it'd be just the opposite. The sole proprietorships are common, but they're not the big corporations. Advantages, yeah, easy secrecy if that's important to you. Owner keeps and gets taxed on all the profits and minimal government regulations, taxed at your individual rate. So everything comes through just as a W-2, kind of tar. And easily dissolved, sometimes too easily dissolved. You die and the company goes away. So the disadvantage is the liability aspect. You and the company are one and the same. It's a sole proprietorship. So let's say you're driving down the road and whatever, a whole box of plumbing products falls out the back of your van and just carnage, crash everywhere. You're gonna sue to the bejesus. It's unlimited. They're gonna take your house, they're gonna take your savings, they're gonna take it all because you caused this situation. So if you're a corporation, they could take the assets of the corporation. They could take that van. They take all those damaged plumbing products that are scattered over the highway and other things connected with the corporation only. They can't touch your savings. They can't touch your home. They can't do any of that. Scarce external funding because again, you're just tied to a single person. It's all on you. Success tied to the owner because you're it. Tougher to get employees because again, it's a kind of a fragile business structure and that higher taxation rate. It's all taxed as personal income. Now, partnership, I'm not going to spend too much time because less likely to get involved in it. Kind of a hybrid type situation, but doesn't have the same advantages of an LLC, which I'll talk about more. So, limited partnerships, general partnerships. I've been involved in partnerships and investing. I did one in a real estate thing, and it wasn't a good deal. And I was a limited partner, and I had I think $10,000 invested, and I got out because I could see things were going south. I wasn't a general partner. I couldn't say, "Hey, you guys are screwing up." That would have exceeded my limited partnership. Limited partnership can't be involved. Limited partner can't be involved in management. If you do cross into that realm, um, you may become a de facto general partner and all of your assets would be at risk. These guys, if they invested $10,000, ultimately they lost all their money plus then some. A limited partner would only lose the amount of his investment. That's why he remains limited. So anyway, if you ever find yourself and it says something about you being a limited partner, keep it that way. There's probably a reason why you are a limited partner and you don't get the ability to get involved in day-to-day management. Um, but that's probably enough on partnerships. They're easy to organize. Two people now, maybe more. Swift is that's assuming you can agree on things, fewer regulations. But the problem that you're not a corporate entity. You still have that reach where they can reach into your personal assets if the corporation screws up. Difficult to sell. This is sort of like a marriage, but worse. There's no emotional bond here. This is just people agreeing to work together. Not for me. Taxation of partnerships beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, but yeah, they um, have different ways of operating that. Corporations. So back in the big general corporation type thing, assets and liabilities are separate for the owners. So that's good in terms of liabilities. Um, rights of a person. So own and transfer property, enter contracts. All these things the corporation can do. It has personhood. And so the majority of US sales and income, because obviously successful organizations are formed in a corporation. They're not going as sole proprietorships. They may be very small corporations. They may be something like, SpaceX, for example, which is not a small corporation, but small in terms of number of people. It could be a privately held corporation, but different thing. Stocks and dividends, if they choose to go that way to generate um, income, distribute profits, creating a corporation. Depends on the complexity of the corporation you're trying to establish. If it's an LLC, dead easy. If it's something else where you have, you know, this corporate charter, yeah, now you're going to be hiring specialized lawyers to do that. But that's probably a big operation, and that's part of the deal. Types of corporation. This has to do where they're originated. So corporations, whoops, are done by the state, right? So you might want to incorporate it in a different state. If you're really secretive and you don't want your name listed on any of the documents, you might form a corporation, say in Wyoming, where they have strict secrecy laws, and somebody can't figure out, oh, some corporation owns that property. Let's see who owns the corporation. Those individuals will typically not be identified in a state such as Wyoming. Or maybe you want to form it in Delaware because you're concerned about, getting sued or something like that. And Delaware's got very pro corporate legal structure. The consumer is at a disadvantage. So anyway, that would make you a foreign corporation because you're foreign to the state. If you're an alien corporation, well, that means you're outside of the United States in this case. Could happen. A Canadian corporation to a business up here would be an alien corporation. Types of corporations, so private. So this would be sort of the SpaceX, DGI, something like that. Sometimes those companies get big and they decide, okay, we started out, we had our angel investors or our entrepreneurs, our fund that started this, and now we want to maybe cash out some of our money. We're going to sell shares and also generate some capital. So we're going to take our private corporation to a public corporation. The way you do that is through an IPO, initial public offering. So SpaceX is going to do this in June. It's going to be crazy, but doesn't mean that it's going to be a great deal. I mean, the stock is going to be traded on the open market. They'll set a prospective target price for the stock, and that's what they'll issue it out at. And the market will have the final vote. The market that day will determine whether their price was too high or too low. So you're not guaranteed to make money, but you are guaranteed to uh, be able to buy a chunk of SpaceX if you want. But getting in on an IPO, it's not always a you know it's not a, a democratic type of endeavor where they have to offer it to everybody on the first day with equal access. Now, the preferred people, the big institutional investors, if you're trying to get involved in that IPO in the first day, even if you're there, in the first minute, you'll probably still end up buying it on the secondary market where somebody is already reselling shares they bought because they had more or less insider access, which is semi-legal. Um, so more corporations, yeah, public corporations. Now we got into what corporations used to be, nonprofits. Nonprofits. I find it entertaining when students say, "Oh, I want to work for a nonprofit because they're this benevolent charitable organization." No, not always. Nonprofits can be, and again, some of the worst ethics in my mind. There's some, you know, corporations that cater to the homeless, and in order to get the proper talent, they pay their directors, 300,000, 600,000 the salaries. I mean, they're making money off of this situation. Or you get people. There was a celebrity just recently. She was talking about her charitable foundation and how it's organized as a nonprofit. And she had brought in, I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 3 million by out soliciting to do this charity for whatever the cause was. And she was, of course, director of the corporation, and she got over $1 million in salary from her charity. It's like you're not very charitable. So, um, and we saw this during COVID. Those big corporations that made all that money. Um, you look at somebody like Bill Gates. He donates a ton of money, but somehow his net worth doubles. How'd that work? So again, there's a lot of hate going around for certain people, but anyway, board of directors. Yeah, this is getting into the bigger boy corporations that we're not going to be as relevant for you if you're starting something. Preferred common stock. Cross that bridge when we get to it. We talked about it in other sectors. Um, Anyway, advantages of corporation, any type of corporation, limited liability, easier to transfer. It will outlive you. It's its own entity, perpetual life, securing funds. It's a more serious structure, generally more successful. They're not making a signature loan to an individual as they are in a sole proprietorship. No, this is a more serious thing. And so that ability to raise capital through stock sales, you can expand quickly. Disadvantages, that entity, that corporation, they make a profit, and that's given to the corporation. Well, the shareholders now they take that profit, and some aspects, although at a lower rate, is subject to tax again, so that results in double taxation. Expense to form depends on the level of corporation. $250 for an LLC is not expensive in my mind. Disclosure of information if it's a public corporation, and then anyway, so they're getting more into the drama of what you might encounter in a C corporation, but the double taxation is relevant. These other ones are not relevant to an LLC. Joint ventures, S corps, beyond the scope. These are done for different reasons, and you're not going to open up a food truck and make it a joint venture or something like that. So we're not going to go there. LLC, quite common, considered the best characteristics of corporations, partnerships. Anyway, pretty effective. You'll see a lot of LLCs out there. Cooperatives, more in the agricultural realm. You'll see it's just a common form where they'll have a hay or a dairy cooperative or something like that. Can be used in other forms, but tends to gravitate towards agriculture. All right, so those were those different forms. So far we covered other types of investments. Then we covered just some business formation things. The thing to get out of the business formation thing is, for the most part, you should, not have a sole proprietorship, and you should probably have an LLC. And the rest of it is kind of interesting. Real estate purchase process. Like I say, my license is dormant. I don't sell real estate anymore other than personal type stuff. But I know a little bit about the process. I've been involved in a bunch of transactions and then also represented buyers and sellers. I took all those courses, but again, they're not that information was gleaned through that process. The purchase process. So searching for a home. Um, First thing you want to do is that pre-approval, like I said. There's only a few people in real estate in terms of agents that really kill it. There's a whole bunch of people who just sort of dabble in it and don't really make any money. But there's a few individuals, like in, say, in Anchorage, there's probably five, six that are making, maybe $500,000 a year, just really doing well, but they work super, super hard. But they have all the repeat business, and then, they just kind of go from strength to strength. You want, one of those people may be involved in your transaction. I mean, ideally, because they have access to the, largest amount of property, and they get the deals done. They know how things work. So those people, though, their time is they have to be pretty efficient with their time. They're not going to go out there and waste time looking at houses with somebody who can't afford it. Um, you need to know what you can afford, and you get that done by pre-approval. You go to a mortgage place, you might have to pay 50 or $100 for your credit check. Fair enough. And they give you a pre-approval letter, and now you've got something that shows that you can actually pay for what you're looking at. The problem, if you don't have that, you can't really make meaningful offers. You're not gonna no good agent is gonna want to be associated with you because you're not really taking the process serious yet. And so, if I'm selling a piece of property, let's say I'm selling something for 500 grand, and somebody doesn't have any pre-approval or anything else, and they make an offer of 500 grand, I might not even take it because I don't want to take the property off the market, because I'm gonna have to take it off the market, and it's going to be in this whole transition thing. We start signing contracts only to have this person flake out on me. I might say, hey, now go get your approval, get your financing, and come back to me. Or if I got another offer for, say, 490, a little bit less, but they're already approved, I'm turning down your $500,000 offer, and I'm taking the 490, even though it's 10,000 less. But it's more of a, as close to a sure thing as you can get in real estate. Location. Um, there's different ways to look at this, but basically you want to buy something that is easy to sell, that is attractive. You don't want something that's cheaper because the schools suck. Well, you may not have kids, but the next person would and might. And if you need to buy something that's going to look attractive to multiple buyers. I tend to buy things on the edges, and what by that I mean on the edge of maybe some green space, on the edge of the neighborhood, on a river. Now there's obviously, especially in Alaska, there's you know erosion, accretion and stuff. But the parcels I buy are usually big enough to where it doesn't matter if a little bit comes or goes. In fact, I've had a lot more cases where where I gain land. But anyway, um, something on a golf course if you're in that sort of environment. Obviously, something on the coastline is going to be anyway. I like things on the edges, for lack of a better word. Licensee, the seller is paying the commission, so it's kind of a no-brainer to use that, which sort of ties into these online services. Alaska's a non-disclosure state, so purchase prices and things like that aren't necessarily public record. So these crawlers and things that these guys would, you know, deploy on the internet to go out there and collect all these prices, those that data doesn't really exist. And um, also, every market's unique, but especially in Alaska, I looked at a number of properties online that said, "Oh, that looks like a great thing." And then you talk to somebody who's actually in that area, and they're like, "Yeah, the reason why you don't want that one is because it's going to be shady." One piece of property I was looking at was up on Highland Drive, and you know, once I realized, oh, it's in an avalanche zone, oh, and it won't get sun till, you know, mid-May, and that sun's only going to be there through, latter part of September. So there's lots of other factors that don't really show when you're just looking at acreage and price and things like that, terrain, things that aren't covered. So they'll emerge as they get better, but right now I would not say they're the real estate. But I think they are under a bit of threat. 6% is generally viewed as a lot of money for a commission. So as these things evolve through AI and other stuff, they'll be more competitive. But right now we're still with agents. Disclosures, another reason to probably buy through an agent, because if things are not disclosed, if there is some sort of defect in the house and it's hidden from you, that's going to come down hard on the agent. If it's a for sale by owner, you'd be viewed by the court as sort of equal partners here, and neither one's an expert. Mistakes happen. If there's a mistake that happens and there's an agent involved, it's going to go down on the part of that agent. So if the seller had an agent and it turned out there was some sort of damage that should have been known or was known to that seller, yeah, they're not going to want to get involved in that. So, but anyway, you list everything that's happened or has happened with that house that might affect the value of it. And if you don't, that's on you. Appraisals, they're not a joke, but they're close to it. The problem is that the appraiser, they go to a course and they're certified, state approved, whatever, but they also know the purchase price that you've offered. So people are always, I'd always have the buyer think, oh wow, I did such a good job of pricing that house. I offered exactly what it appraised at, or appraised for a little bit more. Well, the appraiser knows what you've offered, and so they've got a huge amount of confirmation bias to kind of get those numbers to marry up, all things being equal. So if you get an appraisal that comes in quite a bit lower, it there probably is an issue with the pricing of that property, because that doesn't happen very, very often. Inspection, this is something else that can kind of be gamed. In the real estate world, we had certain inspectors. You get some sort of nervous client that was kind of on the fence. There were certain inspectors you did not call, because there's a whole bunch of home inspection services out there, and some are just super meticulous and will write up and make it look like even a beautiful home has got a lot of defects to it. Then there's other inspectors who barely get out of their car. They just sign the thing off, or they look at stupid, irrelevant items on the home and write up the inspection based on that. For the most part, I had a guy I used. I haven't bought a structure type thing. I've been buying raw land, so I haven't had the necessity for home inspection so much. But this guy was a structural engineer, which was definitely a plus in an area where you have earthquakes. It's good to have somebody who's a bit beyond a home inspector. As long as he's going to be out crawling around, this guy would do the home inspection, but he'd also be able to look at some of the foundation elements and other things that can get extremely costly if they're screwed up. And a regular home inspector who's, you know, checking the outlets to make sure they're grounded properly, which is, yeah, important. But the house falling down, and they walk right by it is, I literally, there's a home, I knew it was too good a deal. I mean, I knew it was priced well. It was out on Mirror Lake, and I think it's still there, but it's definitely sinking into the lake. The water characteristics with the glen and all that's changed, and it's you can't even use a septic tank anymore. The septic tank doesn't percolate anymore. They have to have it pumped out once a month. The water is rising up to meet this house. And anyway, I had the engineer look, and he's like, "Yeah, there's a reason why it's not even worth what they're offering it for." So anyway, um, that can be useful. Loan approval commitment. So at a certain point, you got your pre-approval letter. Now you're talking to the lender and they're doing, a more in-depth approval process. But you can be fairly confident since you did the pre-approval letter that this is um, not just a formality, but they're unless you made some misstatement, everything should go fine. This is also where you'll lock in the interest rate. Because the interest rate, this is kind of a game, where the interest rates kind of go up and down, and you choose your point to say, okay, I think the interest rates are down a little bit. And this is where it helps to have a good mortgage broker who has maybe an idea of which way the market's headed to know whether to lock in or hold off for a bit. Final walkthrough, getting close to the end here. Before you sign, you want to make sure that everything's as it should be. This is kind of, one time I was buying a house, and the bathroom floor there was an acknowledged leak, and they were going to replace the floor prior to selling. And so I go in there, and sure enough, the guy's in there replacing the floor, but he's putting in some crappy composite. He's pulling out the hardwood that was damaged, but he's replacing it with that chipboard, particle board that I personally hate. And anyway, no, he contacted the seller, and they stopped work, and they went back and they put in the proper work. If I would not have done that, and I would have been living with that garbage floor. So you need to go through and make sure that everything's good to go before you get to the closing. Now, the closing, this should be a less stressful event based upon a good agent. You should have all these documents a couple, 3 days beforehand. If you walk in there like they do in a typical closing and they say, "Yeah, I meant to get these to you, but here's all these documents," that, and the closing agent on the other side at the escrow company, they're just shoving you documents saying, "Hey, read this and sign it, read this and sign it." Well, obviously you're not able to read it all in that particular time. And they've got your 20-minute or half-hour closing window. And anyway, it just makes for an overly stressful situation when it doesn't need to be. So look at all those documents and then kind of go in there and review them at the last minute. There will be some documents in there, some of these federal fair loan, housing documents, HUD documents that will kind of scare you a little bit because it'll show just how much you're paying in interest over time. And it'll say, for this $500,000 house, by financing it, even at a low interest rate, but over the course of 30 years, you will end up paying, $1.1 million. And it just blows your mind. But if you know the time value of money and you realize that 30 years from now, that money is not worth that much money, that's actually fair. That's the way it's done. It's, but anyway, if it's presented to you day of, you're going to freak out. Term project, hit on that a bit, put some time into it. Course summary and final review prep. Yep. So do a big kind of a summary of everything we've talked about and then final review. And that will be coming out in a few weeks. And that is it for